There's one for every letter of the alphabet right now.
Really?
We don't have to go that far, but let's definitely talk about E, which is enforcement. What are you going to do when you get a surprise inspection? Is your manager going to freak out and have a panic attack? Are they going to feel confident? Are you going to drive 2 hours from your house, make the regulators wait for you to walk through that facility? And, what happens if there's a serious infraction? You might need legal help to get through that. Enforcement is important.
Welcome to the Kayak, the podcast for cannabis businesses looking to launch, grow, and scale their operations.
Believe it or not, I am actually quite excited to talk to you about compliance. I talk to a lot of dispensary owners that are just starting out or have started, and they always ask me, what are the ABCs of compliance? It's such a loaded word. The regulations are hundreds of pages. So when somebody is building out their compliance playbook, what are the foundation that they should think about?
Awesome. I love the ABCs of compliance. So, accountability. You need to have someone designate one person ideally to be responsible for compliance, for the licensing, someone that is going to be there when things go wrong to answer for that.
Is that
So,
typically the owner, or it could be anybody that's senior?
the owner needs to be heavily involved. They can delegate a lot of the compliance, like day-to-day stuff or more specialized. I always recommend to source that person from cannabis rather than hiring from another industry. A lot of industries do have compliance, but there's a lot of things that are very unique to cannabis.
Is this a specific compliance role, or could it be, say, my inventory manager who's inept in reading law? Is this a full-time thing or a part-time thing, in your
Yeah,
opinion?
there's a couple of different facets of cannabis compliance for sure. Inventory management is a huge part of it, definitely. But then there's also licensing that maybe an inventory management person might not be suitable for. So that person, like helping renew your licenses, a lot of times legal professionals are heavily involved in that. So that's a big bulk of what we do at Seligson Law is licensing. And then there can be some non-inventory related questions or like specifics that come up as well. Things with like your floor plan, if you're a retail dispensary, etc. And it also can depend on the size of your operation. If you've got like a simple, we do specialize in one thing, we only take care of that small team. Maybe that person takes care of all of those things and inventory. But if you've got a more robust, complex, you may need a couple of people on that compliance team.
Okay. I'm just thinking through average dispensary owner that just starts,
Hmm.
maybe two people that are owners and they have a team of 10. In that environment, I'm guessing it's one of the owners needs to just bite the bullet and, hey, you're
Yeah,
the compliance officer.
I would
Okay,
definitely
so
recommend that because their name is on the hook for that.
mhm.
And then work closely with their legal team.
So where does somebody start? I'm an owner, I'm opening up. Where do I start? What do I do? What are my first 10
Definitely.
moves?
Legal team for sure. And a lot of cannabis lawyers don't have a compliance wing. We at Seligson Law do. So that's my specialty is focusing on the nitty gritty of compliance, anything you could need from application to operation and beyond.
How would you set up a program?
How would
Well,
I
what,
set up a program?
yeah.
Yeah, again, it's a lot with your operation style. If you have someone who's really skilled in compliance on staff already, we can set you guys up with some like tools, resources to walk you through the regulations so that you're not just reading like 200 pages of rules. It's you can actually absorb it and it's not as cut and dry and boring. So we have some great resources for that. I can do a boot camp with staff, so I could come in a couple of days, even for longer, and really support on training. And then even past your opening day, I like to provide support with when people are They've got questions that things they've never came across before.
Mhm.
So that's been pretty big in New York since that industry and that market is just launching. A lot of people are really interested in that.
What should a owner have in place with regards to compliance before opening day?
Before opening day, be fully prepared.
It's easier said than done. You're
Right.
you're in the business.
Short list wise, know what kind of IDs you can accept. So every
Okay.
state, they're going to have a different criteria for IDs. And you might read that list and think, oh, this is simple. But go over those scenarios in practice because you're going to come across some unique things, especially if you've advertised your launch and you've got a huge crowd out front. There's going to be people who have different types of IDs, and you want to be prepared for that. And have a system in place for questions too. Your staff comes across something that they've never came across before, have a manager or somebody ready to answer those questions without causing a disruption to sales flow. And procedures, training and procedures. I didn't mention that earlier, but we do write pretty thorough operation plans for people. That's kind of part of the training too. And just having those procedures standardized. So this is
Are,
what a
are,
sales look like, this is what a return looks
mm,
like, etc.
are there different areas that are consistent across states? And you made a really good point earlier. Make sure that you're accepting the right IDs, and I'm guessing you're selling the right quantity. You understand the quantity in your state.
Mm-hmm.
You understand how to accept inventory, how to count inventory, all those things. What are the common, top 10 things that you should train your employees on, but also have a manual for?
Yeah, we could call this B for boundaries. So there's going to be like a handful of things like IDs, sales limits that are mildly consistent state to state, but definitely very specific and change state to
Mhm.
state.
I was thinking to myself, as somebody that's the outside looking in, I have a peripheral view. We work with so many customers in the cannabis space, and compliance is always the thing that gnaws at the back of their minds, I would guess. As an operator, you are obsessed over customer experience, retail experience, all of these things that are involved in merchandising. And then you have compliance is such a big part of the industry. But I feel as though there's a skill set that's lacking for operators in that field. And that's where somebody like you come in, that's an expert that people can lean on to kickstart their compliance. And I think it's so needed because it's not a skill set that you're naturally born with. I have no idea starting off where to even start. I look at the regulations for New York, for example, it's hundreds of pages. And how does that hundreds of pages, what is needed to turn that into a manual that the team can be trained on? And also that it's distilled to what's actually really important from an operational perspective. Hey, out of the things that are in here, we need to be compliant on these things.
Yeah, there's definitely some non-negotiables. I think it's really interesting that for me, compliance feels like very second nature. I understand it. There's no questions for me. And I want other people to feel that same way too, just that level of confidence, because it is pretty scary. There's some serious repercussions that can happen if you get it wrong. And I don't want that fear to overshadow running your business. Like, I want you to still have a lot of brain space for that creativity to pour into your marketing and other areas. I like working with my clients to make them feel confident. So, definitely, if I could create a list of like non negotiables to have your procedures, sales, you think it's pretty simple. Oh, it's like another cashier job. But you have to be careful about what you talk about, even
Mm.
at the sales register. So, different states have different rules for, can we mention medical cannabis? Can I provide you medical advice? What's the best way to phrase that? And even your state will provide bud tenders with some guidance on, this is how we deal with, this is recreational and this is medical. And they even have different words for it. Like adult use sometimes rather than recreational. Anyways, sales aren't as cut and dry. Same with returns. Sometimes you're going to have to destroy those products. So, sales accuracy, having your team be confident in that too. Also, inventory management, for sure, very important. Got to be very organized. Having someone very detailed, diligent in your inventory management, reduce those inventory discrepancies, key. Then I would say also labeling. Labeling is very important for products. A lot of people think that's a supplier's job. It's also a dispensary's job. And sometimes, maybe a lot of states move past this, but there's labels you had to apply at the point of sale. Warning labels, you don't want to sell a product, missell a product to a customer. Things could go really bad with that. Imagine if you thought you were buying a 10 milligram gummy, well, maybe a 5 milligram gummy, and it turns out to be a 10 milligram gummy. You don't read the package, you just pop one. That customer is going to have a bad experience. So we want to make sure the product's labeled, we've sold it to them correctly and very clearly for safety. And a lot of things with compliance, which kind of I think helps people feel more confident, is that it's essentially just really running a business well. Having the airtight inventory, having that airtight sales experience to promote for safety, and documenting everything. That's really what it is, just keeping really good records, documenting really good inventory, and focusing on safety.
Is there a playbook that owners can use when creating their standard operating system? And how big is that? So what does that look like? What does distilling the regs into an operating system that employees can be trained on? And maybe that's a loaded question because there's a lot of work involved in that, and that's where you come in to, as a consultant. Do you come in to help owners start the SOPs?
Yeah, I love SOPs. How they've evolved over the years is really interesting to me because I didn't know someone who knew someone who was a really good operator back in the day or 10 years ago or so to get your hands on really good SOPs. Maybe more so in cultivation than in retail. And they were very valuable. And now we've gotten more and more procedures as our industry nationwide, Canada included, has matured. But as far as the baseline for it, there's definitely training modules and key things that need to be in there. And you just expand upon that. Our retail operating procedure tends to be over 100 pages long.
That's what I was
Very
going to ask you. When it gets that long, does it become practical anymore? I find sometimes when I go into an environment and the SOPs are really big and it's really restrictive and it's very specific. And I think to myself, when you get audited and you force yourself to these rules that are so strict, that's going to come to hurt you on the back end because it's so strict now. And I was going to ask you, when somebody comes in, the regulators come in, are they looking at your SOPs? Does it abide by the regulations? And then are they testing, are you abiding by your SOPs? So if your SOPs are more strict than the regulations, you shot yourself in the foot.
That's really important and very fascinating for me is making sure that these SOPs are detailed, they're standardized, but they're also not going to shoot yourself in the foot if you use a red clipboard instead of a green clipboard to write your visitor log as a basic example. So that they're like adaptable to basic small changes in your operation. And that's something I really focus on and I see as a mistake sometimes in procedures, especially honestly shorter procedures. Sometimes they end up being too specific. Just a general observation I've made taking a look at other SOPs. And those procedures are normally shorter. They're less than the 100 pages that we've been able to produce. And sometimes they tailor this so that it's not so specific, so that in case you do use that green clipboard instead of the red, you're not getting in trouble because I don't think regulators are going to care if it's something as random, the color of your clipboard, but if it's something like your operating hours or where you check IDs, they're going to care that you're not following those SOPs.
So you mentioned it's 100 pages long. How can somebody ensure that their team is compliant on such a large document of rules?
So, first of all, breaking it down and having people have that general overview. Okay, so these are the sections of the operating plan. This is the tape. I normally give everybody the table of contents, walk everybody through quickly, table of contents, how to read each SOP, like the parts of the SOP. This is the scope, this is the procedure, here's where you can find the references, etc. And then I break it down all the way to the entire book. Show them this is where you can find all this stuff. But then breaking it down a little bit more into specializations for your role. So having maybe a front of the house manager and a back of the house manager that can just really grasp those different things, become specialized in those things, and eventually get that cross training and become masters of the whole procedure.
So if I was starting out and I'm opening up, the first step, I think the most prudent step for a business owner is align yourself with the right legal team that can help you create the SOPs. That's like number one. Number two is make sure that your SOPs are not too restrictive in the way that you have to operate. So it's compliant, but it gives you the flexibility to teeter off just a flexibility. And I think that comes probably with experience on somebody from your team or who you're working with. And then it comes down to employee training. So what does the initial training, and you've mentioned a little bit of this to make sure that your team's up to speed, but is there a closed loop validation that, hey, my team is following up with these SOPs? What does that look like?
You mean making sure that the SOPs are actually being followed? Regular audits, for sure. And that's another thing we do too. We'll come in and make sure a couple weeks in or a month in or a few months in, once you've got the grip on everything, that you're following the SOPs, or maybe something needs to be tailored to where you are and the stage of the growth of your company too. That's another thing that I think is important. The SOPs can't really stifle your growth, and they may change and adapt.
What are
Maybe
the
you're carrying
instances?
more inventory, maybe you're carrying less, maybe you found a more efficient way to do stuff.
What are instances that you've seen that, hey, this what you have today is gonna stifle your ability to grow?
A lot in inventory management. And sometimes I think a better example is sales. So let's say you have been getting really busy and you decide we want to implement these kiosks. And most of our business is going to flow through these kiosks. That's probably going to fit in your SOPs, and not you might not need to change them, but you might want to look at when you're checking IDs
Mm.
in your SOP to change that and make sure that kind of change can adapt to the volume of business that you see. That's
No, that
one.
is a really good example because that's true. Typically, you're checking IDs in the front, but maybe you had it in the sale stage also, I guess. You're checking IDs twice. And if the second time you're not doing it, I don't know why you would be doing it twice, but I see what you mean. Does your APs, if you're changing your sales flow, are your existing APs current?
And are they still going to prevent you from risks too?
How often should somebody check to see if their SOPs are relevant today and are they're being followed?
I think once you've got those SOPs, you've got your team trained and they're following them, you will know when there's a time for change. When you're considering maybe you're going to change point of sale systems, or maybe your point of sale system has come out with a new feature. Maybe that's the time to check on your SOPs. If you've had a lot of turnover If your team is providing you some feedback that things are impractical or they found a more efficient way to do stuff. If you're coming up with a lot of inventory discrepancies, you're having a lot of returns, probably the biggest one. If you've ever had a audit from the regulatory body, they've given you advice, or if you've had a compliance incident, that's a big time where you need to take a look at your SOPs and make sure you're protected from that risk.
Okay, I see. The person that's in charge of compliance definitely needs to be heavily involved in operations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your compliance officer should be there on the floor or working in the business, it appears. And it shouldn't be somebody that's at head office, for example.
Definitely. I've seen a lot of different scenarios where there is a compliance department that maybe it's a chain of stores. There's a compliance department that they can't visit every store. So you generally can communicate with them via email. And in those scenarios, your manager, your team should be very heavily trained. And the level of training I like to provide the teams, I think that would be suitable for having a compliance manager who may be remote or only stops in for audits every once in a while. But you're going to need that compliance control available and definitely part of day-to-day operations.
That makes sense. You mentioned earlier about the ABCs of compliance, and I cut you off. I'm so sorry. I
When
should ask this question because it's important, but let's talk about that. What are the ABCs of compliance?
Okay, great. I love the ABCs of compliance because I have a daughter. I'm teaching her the ABCs, and everything is the ABCs to me right now. So we talked about A, accountability, talked about B, boundaries.
So, can you speak a little bit more about boundaries?
Okay, so yeah, there should be like events that trigger compliance question. Can we do this? Can we do that? Know the basics of your boundaries. You got to check IDs, all that kind of stuff. Very basic stuff. And know your limits on them, sales limits included. So that's boundaries. Did that make sense?
So, there's certain thresholds that
Yes.
employees should know that this may be a compliance risk. What is the compliance risk for it? So,
Exactly.
IDs, sales limits, and etc. Like compliance triggers, I guess.
Yeah. If somebody says something, it should trigger, oh, this is a safety thing, or oh, I learned about this in compliance.
Do you recommend having a list of boundaries that employees should be aware of?
Checklists are great. Keeping it simple, for sure. And same thing, employees and also more of like the management level and ownership level. There should be some key lists of things that to keep an eye out for.
Gotcha.
And then
Or
I think C, huge chain of custody. That's a big part of compliance is just preventing diversion. That's why it got started and became so complex. How do we prevent diversion for this product? We're creating a new market for it, erasing the black market, trying to put it on a legal market. So tracing that chain of custody became a big deal. Track and trace, seed to sale, whatever we want to call it. Just not letting a single speck out of that chain of custody.
so what does that look like for a dispensary in a dispensary environment?
Everything has to be recorded in your inventory management system. Sales have to go through your point of sale. In most states, including samples. So if you're going to give your staff some samples, going to do some research and development, most of the times that has to go through your point of sale. And beyond sales and inventory, also in the receiving side. So I went backwards a little. When you receive products, making sure that you've got that manifest, you've got that invoice, and it goes into your inventory tracking system accurately.
Do you recommend when you're receiving product to have two people present?
Definitely. Definitely. It's helpful for efficiency. It's helpful for accountability. Ken, our founding attorney, it rings in my head, have two sets of eyes on everything.
Mm. And that could be one of the areas of boundaries too, because if you're receiving something, that could be a compliance issue if the manifest does not agree with the actual physical product being received.
Right. It leads me to D, which might be my favorite because I think it gives people a lot of confidence, which is documentation. No,
But did
it
you
is. Okay.
document?
Did you document it? If there was an incident, you got some new inventory, is it documented? That's why my
Mm.
SOPs are 100 pages. Very important. And like I said, I think it makes people a little bit more confident because if it's documented, even if you don't know the answer, we could figure it out.
So when would that occur? Can you give some examples of, is it just an incident or is it just anywhere that there are inventory movement or potential risks? When does documentation matter? Like how would I train the sales associates on when to document?
Documentation is really everything. Every sale you conduct, you document it through your point of sale system. If someone is discussing something that doesn't feel quite right, but you don't know the answer to right off the bat, maybe you need to document that. May that be an adverse reaction. That's probably the best example. Someone says, this product made me feel really ill.
Uh,
Different states handle this a little differently, but you definitely want to document that. You might want to get that customer's phone number, and if your manager's not available to handle it at that time or you've never came across that issue before, you might want to get that person's phone number so you can reach out to them and really resolve that complaint.
is there a platform or software that dispensary owners should use for documentation?
Definitely for complaint logging. Yeah. I think most of the people I work with use like Google, but there's probably better ones that control that complaint a little bit better.
Which Google platform?
Just Google Sheets, having
Okay.
a complaint log. That's probably the most basic.
Yeah.
Is just a Google Sheets complaint log or a Google form so that you can't really edit those responses or lose that data.
Shameless plug, you can use logs, right?
Logs for Kaya Push.
Yeah, kind
I
of
was
log.
really hoping you would say that. That's wonderful. I love that. I'm excited. I want to check it out.
Okay, I see. So it's really the ability to log in, and I'm thinking about the perfect system is being able to categorize what it is, the types of things that you're logging, being able to log it, and then finding it. So being able to search, hey, how common is this particular type of incident over the last year, and being able to pull that out.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, your point of sale systems, Kaya Push, logs,
Mhm.
those are definitely important ways. Probably a lot better than Google Sheets for security.
So we have accountability, which is who's really ultimately accountable for compliance.
Boundaries.
Boundaries, yes. So what are some of the areas that you may be out of compliant? So what does that list look like? A checklist for the team. Then you have C, which is
Chain of custody.
chain of custody, which is everything needs to be really much, there needs to be a chain of custody with inventory. So all the way through, we have to know how much we receive all the way through selling and even returns, and then documentation.
There's one for every letter of the alphabet right now.
Really?
We don't have to go that far, but let's definitely talk about E, which is enforcement. What are you going to do when you get a surprise inspection? Is your manager going to freak out and have a panic attack? Are they going to feel confident? Are you going to drive 2 hours from your house, make the regulators wait for you to walk through that facility? And, what happens if there's a serious infraction? You might need legal help to get through that. Enforcement is important.
So what does, and I was going to ask you this, you've probably been through so many audits in your career. What do regulators care about? What are the things that, as an operator, I need to make sure that I have my T's crossed, my I's dotted?
That you're adhering to the details, the plan that you gave them. So if you say on your application you're open 9 to 5 and you're open 10 to 2 a.m., that's going to be a problem. Just as an example, so adhering to all of those details that you gave them. Most jurisdictions, they make you tell them everything about your operations, and you should adhere to that.
So if there's a change in operations, you have to submit it to the regulator.
That's like F for floor plan, which we can talk next. Make sure your floor plan and you're abiding by that. That's pretty key. And then making sure that there's no serious issues going on. We all want to ace our inspection, but the inspectors, even if they're going to find something, no matter how little it is, no matter how many years in business you've been doing this, and they're going to find a little something. They want to make you do better and help you do better. Most of the times they're very supportive, but you definitely want to make sure that there's no major issues.
What?
Surveillance is probably
Oh,
huge. If you don't have surveillance, just close your doors for a little while until you get that.
gotcha.
Call your surveillance guy in right away. Most jurisdictions are going to be really
Tough
strict
on that.
about making sure all cannabis is visible on camera.
Are there a checklist, a common checklist that regulators look at no matter what? So they're probably looking at, hey, based on what you've submitted, are you abiding by that? Do you have your surveillance? Do they do inventory checks? What are the things that you know for sure that they're checking when they come through that door?
Definitely. Yeah, there's definitely a checklist. And that's when like having an experienced professional comes in handy,
Mhm.
or having a good network and just, oh, you were inspected? Tell me, how did it go? What did they check you on? What was that list like? A lot of times that's passed down information. They might not publish their audit checklist publicly.
But you know what? Actually, they probably published all of the incidents, right? So
Sometimes.
incident that previous audits, infractions, and incidents of dispensaries in your state, you might have that information. And if you mine through that, maybe that's a good start.
Definitely. Yeah, for recalls, they'll post all the recalls. So make sure if someone else is getting recalled for a similar thing that you're doing, definitely reevaluate. And yeah, a lot of times they will post it, especially if they didn't state it explicitly enough, or they felt like they haven't trained their operators on it.
Mhm.
They'll post a bulletin about it. So make sure you're getting all of those communications.
So you spoke a little bit about floor plan. Why is floor plan important?
That's a big infraction. So if you're, say, for example, you were able to buy up the unit next to you and you don't tell the regulators, hey, we're expanding our floor plan. Big oops. More common than you'd think. Or your floor plan's not properly labeled. Another issue.
What do you mean by properly labeled?
So on the floor plan, there's going to be an area designated for each licensed activity. In most states, they're going to want to see that. So where your point of sale systems are. Even if you expand and you get a third point of sale system, they're going to want to know that most of the times.
It
Um,
seems like any change in your
yeah,
business, just pick up the
just tell them.
phone, send them an email, let them know.
Yeah, that's why I say just document it and report. If you something as simple as another point of sale, maybe you got a better vault for where you can store your cannabis.
What if you
Tell them
got
that.
another vault?
Yeah, if you got another vault, you're gonna have to tell them that too.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what should, and I should have asked you this earlier when we were talking about enforcement, how can somebody prepare for an inspection? What should somebody do?
Mock audits. I definitely recommend that. A lot of times, if I come in, I'll use what I know the inspectors are looking at, which sometimes changes seasonally if they've got a new issue that's arising that they want to make sure isn't widespread. So a mock audit would be really good. And
If you're doing a mock audit and you fail that mock audit, do you document that?
I'm not going to tell the regulators, hey, we're definitely, that's why it's a good internal control,
Yeah.
having those internal controls, that stopgap between
Hmm.
you and having to disclose it to the regulators. Obviously, there's some infractions that you are going to
You
have to
have to.
disclose.
Yeah.
Like you've got a ton of inventory on hand that you can't trace back. Somehow, maybe it's just a missed sale. But if it's over a certain percentage, most jurisdictions, you'll have to report that. But yeah, making sure you've got those internal controls in place. You don't have to have the
Do you
regulators find out about it first.
talk to sales associates and personnel to see if they understand, to just have conversations, say, do you do this or that? Or walk me through a sale or show me an inventory count.
I would say most of the times they're going to stick with your management team. They're not going to ask unless they can do anything, but
Yeah.
they might not come to your brand new staff member and be like, how did they train you? They might just stick with your management team and, hey, manager, show me how you conduct sales. A point about that is they can conduct secret shopping. So that's why it's important. Never laps up, even on your front of the line. Whoever you're talking to could be a spy from the
Mhm.
OCM.
That's so true. Wow. Okay, so I don't think we have time to go through all of the letters,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
the remaining letters, what are the most important to you in terms of staying compliant?
In terms of staying compliant, I'm going to say S for standard operating procedures. Doing things the same way in a standard way over and over and
Mhm.
just standardizing it, it's going to save you so much headache. A lot of times we're just like running to the next goal, we're sprinting, we're flying by the seat of our pants. We have different staff members taking care of a specific responsibility and they do it differently, but just really standardizing that.
And I always thought about, okay, what's practical as an operator? What a good way to think about what to train your staff on and what to prioritize be the types of client interactions and the flow of inventory. What I mean by that is there's only so many different types of interactions that you have at the door. What do you do at the door? What do you do with customers on the floor? What is the communication like on the product? What can you say at the cash register? So there's only certain points of communication that you have with customers and the flow of inventory from receiving it all the way to storing it, all the way to counting it and then selling it. Are those the points where an operator should focus on? Like,
Yeah, definitely. You've got it right there. Very rarely is there going to be something, if you've been in business for long enough, it's going to be rare that you come across something you haven't before.
mhm.
And then your inventory system should be very routine. There shouldn't be any surprises.
How often should somebody count inventory? And what would, yeah, in your opinion, what should that look like? Their inventory count strategy.
I have a really good system from managing dispensaries for a long time. That kind of depends also on your jurisdiction, the volume of business, how much staff you have, etc. But it's definitely recommended, I think, to do it every day and just having a really efficient system in place for opening and closing your store. Closing down your inventory in a similar way you close down your cash drawer. So, when you count down your cash drawer, oh, it's up $50. We have this product here that's not matching physical inventory. If you do both of those checks, you can pretty much identify, oh, this person got the wrong product or they were mischarged.
Mm.
And not only can it keep your inventory more accurate, keep your staff more accountable, you can have a better customer experience because instead of that customer having to call you or come back the next day and say, hey, something went wrong, you can call them and say, hey, we already know something went wrong. Let me fix it.
It.
Yeah.
So would that be where you prioritize? End of day
Yeah,
evaluation of that after
exactly.
good?
Knowing what was sold, it's more okay for inventory reconciliation. It would be more like, did the inventory go away that we expected it to go away
Hmm.
physically on hand to what we sold
Hmm.
or said we sold in the management system, if
Gotcha.
that makes sense. I said it more detailed.
Yeah, and would you recommend having also random inventory checks?
Yeah, most of the times your jurisdiction may require you do monthly audits or weekly audits. that you got to check what that time frame is. So I don't know if necessarily that's random, but if you're not doing that, so definitely abide by that audit timeline from your regulator. If you're not doing nightly audits, random may come into play at that point.
Yeah, I was thinking of, let's say your regulator needs you to recount all of the inventory every month. So you pick SKUs and it'll be random. Tuesday, we're going to do this. And away you go. And throughout the month, everything's been counted.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it, I think, rather than having one day where your inventory manager's like really stressed out. He's got to count the whole building.
Yeah.
The floor is disrupted. Do a little bit randomly,
hmm
little bit by little.
And it keeps things, what I've heard was that you don't want predictability. If employees understand predictability, hey, you always count inventory on this day, then there's the risk of them planning something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's a really good point. It's very interesting. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, so it's just the more random you have, it keeps everybody, okay, we don't know what's going to be counted on Tuesday. We don't know who's counting on Tuesday, and it's blind. I'm fascinated by internal controls and internal efficiencies. And that's why this conversation to me is really fascinating, because there's a fine line between what is practical, right, and what is not practical. So the more strict you are, the less practical it is, but the more accurate you are. And there's always a balancing act between that and the risk of not being compliant. And you always have, as an operator, you have to walk this fine line of being compliant, but making sure that it also is practical as well. Theresa, thank you so much. Was there anything that we didn't go over that you feel, hey, we should definitely touch on?
This was an awesome conversation. This was great. I think we gave people a lot of tools to compliantly operate and feel confident in their dispensary operations and go get it.
Before I let you go, how can our listeners find you?
Oh, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I post a lot on LinkedIn, a lot of free resources for the markets we focus on in California and New York. You can email me, Teresa@SeligsonLaw.com.
We'll
Probably
drop your handle in the body of the pod when we release it. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for Kaya Push.
Thanks for listening to the Kayakast podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app or visit our website to access the full archive of episodes from the show.